into this with this, and they thought this.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's what you've got. This is an Apollo 13 kind of problem.
Now you can share.
The point is that you've got a task that you have to do. And the idea is to get the balls from here, from this cup, from the upper cup to the lower cup. You can't touch the balls directly with your hands. You can only use your hands in the airspace over the box. You could touch the cups, you just can't touch the balls. So there's some limited amount of time that you'll have to construct something. So then you can do whatever you want to with your hands while you're constructing it, move things around, right? And then at some point we're going to say, all right, now the exercise starts, and whenever you're ready, and then you can start manipulating the balls. Before then, you can do whatever you want. You can test things out, you can make stuff, you can tape stuff together, you do whatever you want. But once the exercise starts, that's when your hands are limited to the airspace over the box, basically. And then the balls have to get into the other cup. So one of the things that we're going to find in this axiomatic design is how to deal with change. And when I teach this, one of my favorite courses to teach, it's half full-time grads and half full-time engineers who are working in industry. It's an evening course. And so there's some neat interactions there. But one of the things I asked so the full-time grads sort of understand what's going on, I said, all right, all those of you who are practicing engineering, how many of you were given a design problem where nothing changed from the time you were given the problem to the time you completed it? So if everybody's not, it never happens. And so I think we can, the fuzzy definitions, the questions, oh, this changed, oh, we just thought of this, that's completely normal in design work.
Take that box and just turn it over.
Okay. You've got all kinds of stuff in there, though.
You may go over it, but the smaller one may get stuck. Because it's
Okay, so now
I'm just thinking like if
So
you put this through it,
the way I see it,
through this drawing, it can,
without having
it would
to
add.
doing everything.
Scott knows that you look at this great challenge for the kids. There's a bunch of resources and said, okay.
Close. You can always need something on the other side. Yeah.
And I taught one engineering course.
But then we gotta figure out how to get it
That was 2
out
months
of
ago.
my other design idea. I wondered if you could just take the two cups together like this. Flip it over somehow, and technically we're getting the balls in the other cup.
Right, we have this one.
Except that our hands can't leave the airspace here. We gotta figure out a way to. Well,
I think so, you can't be, it doesn't matter.
I don't think so.
Oh,
Well, I don't know.
All right, that works.
Well,
So we're going to big event here.
Okay, so we have our own.
If we did something like this.
If we just like have some kind of
Not a.
No.
Bouncy.
if we get this kind of let it go and some come back and this or had some experience with this.
I like this thing. Probably do it all the way down.
So,
Take that box and just turn it over.
okay. You've got all kinds of stuff in there, though.
What?
So what are the important things about a design process? In other words, what would we like to get out of the design process?
A useful artifact or a
Okay.
process?
Okay, right, a useful artifact
For
was
society.
solving some sort of design solution, all right,
Mhm.
that would be good. So what else, in other words, if we had competing design processes, how could we tell which design process was the best?
More efficient? Which one's
More efficient, okay. When I'm doing a design review using axiomatic design, so we're further along in the process with a company, with a group, one of the things I've noticed is that you need as big a bandwidth as you can get. So.
What do you mean by that when you say?
Well, we need to communicate, and when we're doing a design review in a company, the communication is important. Because one of the things, how do you know when you finished it? If we're all working on the same design, so we're going to come up with one design, all right, let's do this. And we'd say, well, how do we know when we're done? And so one of the ways you know when you're done with a group of engineers, you reach a consensus. People stop arguing, go, yeah, looks good. Right? So, and how do you build a consensus more quickly? Better communication. So when we talk about doing design, we want to do it often in a solution-neutral environment. So we don't essentially jump the gun on the solution. Let's try to look at all the solutions and try to weigh them somehow. Was that your point about
Yes,
prior
yes.
knowledge? Okay,
Yes,
good.
yes, yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna put that down here, prior knowledge.
That sounds better than what I
Yeah,
was-
solution,
yes.
I understand what you're saying about the amount of bandwidth that you need to communicate. I'll just bring you back to the classroom for a second.
yeah, good.
There are students in there who will become incredibly confused and learn nothing from that. So you have to be very careful how big your bandwidth is in the room. If it's 4 people, oh, good up. If it's the whole room speaking at once, generating information at once, probably not as good an idea. The only time it works out that is when the room is quieter and people are presenting things like on your charts. They could do it that way. But smaller children, younger children would have a more difficult time with a large bandwidth like that.
And one of the things we want to get to, Jenny, is just what you're talking about. How do I teach this? And one of the things I want to learn from you, what are the special challenges
Right.
that you have in the classroom? And you brought up some really interesting points, and I'm trying to capture them. But you've got a much greater level of sort of abilities in your classrooms than I have in mine,
Exactly.
right? And then, so how do we keep everybody involved in learning when you've got all those different levels and you've got all those different learning types? By the time they get to grad school in engineering, we've got a select group.
What's the one thing you want to get graduate students to stop saying? We already know that, right?
Right.
Okay? So believe me, adults think along the same line. And the one reason why is because we're taught to think along the same line. We're taught that this is the way to do iteration after iteration after iteration.
This together. Is this ball gonna stick on it or not? Or is it gonna be too heavy? Play-Doh's also.
It affects really the area of requirements. What are my requirements, what are my constraints, how am I gonna define that? It seems more in that versus what's really the problem, how am I gonna come up with lots of solutions, how am I gonna, constraints, how am I gonna now, using convergent thinking versus, it doesn't really go into that area, at least I don't see that yet.
You're right, and we don't address, here's how to come up with ideas. And that's kind of a separate problem. Where do we find all these solutions? And there's lots of ways to do that, and there's other things like trees that addresses
Right,
that. But how do you come up with a good idea? Have lots of ideas, and then be able to sort through the good ones. And that's the strength of the axiomatic design. So if we look at what makes a good design, all right, it solves the problem, and it is the most efficient. How can we make the design process more efficient? How can we focus on the good solutions that are going to solve the problem earlier in the process? How can we foretell? How can we predict the future?
Yeah.
Well, we can look to see what takes the most time in a design process, and then try and work where the process is shorter and do more of it that way.
What was taboo about that?
Yeah, okay, so that's what we're trying to solve.
So the problem starts with the customer needs. Right? What does the customer want? And so in this problem, we're saying, it's a little bit contrived, obviously. The customer needs the ball to move this way. What are the constraints? The constraints on the use of hands. And so, now as you guys are working very carefully on the problem definition and getting this right. So the problem starts with the customer needs. We've got 2 axioms, and we're going to use these to judge which solutions are going to be the best early on. Most engineers are working with some sort of design iteration cycle that goes like this. Try it, if it doesn't work. And so one of the things I noticed about your solution here is you started trying things, and you're putting stuff together. That's great. This didn't work quite right. And so one of the questions is, how many people tried something that took up some time that didn't work, that you ended up abandoning? So the point is, if we could more quickly say, I don't think that's gonna work so well. Then we could move on to a quicker solution.
But that's a learning process also, what they were doing, right?
Right.
They tried something, it didn't work, so
Okay.
they shifted.
It was-
So now the question
Absolutely.
is, how fast can you learn by
Yeah.
trying to theorize and do something versus trial and error?
I think what we did here, as I looked at it, as I would look at it with my own kids, is when we did something, we never went back. We added to what was there. We didn't, it wasn't like we knew one thing wasn't gonna work. We knew it would be better if we added something. So we did not scrap one single thing here.
I kind of went from the solution and worked our way back to the top.
That's kind of what we
Rather
tried
than
to
from
do.
top down, bottom up.
Well, Duke and Bill, you guys did a lot of conversing, going through what the problem is. You came up with a very good, elegant solution, and then you abandoned it.
No, we didn't abandon it, we just, that was solution one, and then we had a reason to believe it wasn't gonna be accepted, so we kept going. Cause we were getting vague instructions. And we-
No, I think just a time issue.
Yeah, maybe.
I think it was, like
Oh, you mean the
mentioned,
cup
it was a
tip?
time
Yeah,
issue.
I mean, if
No,
you
I-
put it up and you put masking tape on,
Right,
if you don't like
If
that.
we were having a customer
yeah,
meeting, I would
yeah,
definitely
yeah,
have
that's
shown that to
right
somebody.
there, right?
Yeah.
You're done, and that's a solution, right? It's
Yeah.
elegant, there's very few resources that required,
Right.
little time in it. So you came up with a solution, and then you said, well, we could do
Well, I think what we said was we better come up with something else. Not we're abandoning that, but we have reason to believe our customer isn't gonna go for that. So
Well,
we
one of
better
the
have them back.
constraints was they couldn't touch the cups.
Right.
So that probably.
Yeah.
kind
But we
of
could have
in
figured
their
out,
mind.
we could have figured out a way
Yeah.
to put chopsticks on it probably.
Right.
So what are we doing as engineers? And largely what we're talking about too is try to train people to do this kind of design work. What is design work? Design work actually, where's the value in that? And as I tell the engineering students, you actually aren't gonna make anything. It's your job to explain to somebody else how to make it. You get to keep your hands clean. Right? You're not actually gonna make this stuff. You create value by thought. And then, well, what is thought? And so thought is, in Eric Baum's book, he says, thought is all about semantics. And semantics is trying to find the compact nature of the universe and manipulate symbols so that you can find a solution. And that's essentially what we're trying to do in the design process. Can we reduce the problem to symbols and then manipulate the symbols and find a solution?
Well, I think the great thing from a teaching perspective for kids is the fact that it does, it does help bring in a thought process first, and then they love to build things.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't constrain them, they'll go right to putting something
I'm
together.
thinking about it in my writing class. I'm looking at this and I'm saying to myself, there's a lot of students who will just, you give them a thing to write about. And I do a lot of it because I have a lot of kids on different tiers of learning all the time. So my top kids, I'm giving them things to write that are harder. And they just want to sit down and have it come out of the piece of paper without a plan, without a thought as to what that's going to look like in the end. And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, oh yeah, they really need to.
But that's all I think that's the whole societal problem,
It
is the
is.
fact that we don't think first.
Well,
It's like Einstein, somebody said to Einstein, there's that old proverb of, if the world was ending in an hour, what would you do? And he said, I would take the first 59 minutes and think about what problem am I trying to solve, and then use the last minute to solve the problem. The point is, we don't in society anymore think first. We want to go write something, we want to go build something, we want to, without that thought process in front. And that's what we as teachers need to show, that there's a value added to it. Oh, we got some short here too.
Oh, okay.
Design, the way it's practiced there, how can I foresee if it's a good solution? I've worked in this area before, that looks right. But could somebody just step into an area that they'd never worked in before and go, that doesn't look so good? And how could you tell? So what are the commonalities? And the commonalities are right here, these axioms. So the best designs will maintain independence of the functions. This makes a design adjustable and controllable. And this makes it robust. Minimize the, okay. These two rules are essentially a decomposition of KISS. So if I ask somebody, so, how do you tell it's a good design? And you go, well, does it solve the problem, right? Does it meet the customer needs? Does it avoid the constraints, right? Okay, so did it solve the problem? One. And then I said, well, you got two designs now. You're going for a graduate degree in engineering, you're going to be supervising engineers. People are going to be coming to you with competing designs. How do you tell which one's the best? And when the engineers bring them to you, I say designs are like babies. They always look good to the people who make them.
I love that
That's
one.
true.
And people will defend their designs as if they're defending their genetic material in the next generation. I want my idea in there. I want to be able to point to that. So that was my idea. Beyond all rationality to whether or not it's a good solution. So what we need is some rules. And one of my former doctoral students said, yeah, these are like the rules of the game. We go from argument to analysis. But I would suggest that independence and information is a decomposition of simplicity. That if I keep things independent, which means I adjust one thing and it doesn't mess something else up. Right? That's simple. If I go to adjust one thing and 3 or 4 things mess up, yeah, that's not so simple. Right? And then I want a design too that is, if something changes, right, the temperature, the people doing it or something, it still works. So if we come up with a good design for teaching something and the mix in the classroom changes, how robust is that design? Or do I have to throw it out and start again?
Another teacher, and Scott was such a great challenge.
So the way axiomatic design was developed in the 70s was by looking at that kind of design, or that kind of process, and saying, what are the things that they're doing that are common to all good designs? And then part of the problem is, how do I teach that to somebody?
Right.
So it's one thing to be a great athlete, but can you coach? And the great coaches are the ones that can say, try this. And then all of a sudden, hey, you got it.
Yeah.
Right. So the problem though with the KISS is that applying it isn't simple.
Right.
And so what do I do when I have a big problem? What do I do when I have something that's too large to take all at once? I can't just go, all right, which one's simple? I go, oh my goodness, these are really intricate systems. How can I look at it and tell which one's
Did I
simple?
break it down, the problem?
You gotta break it down. Decomposition.
Oh.
Excellent.